Right, we're recording.
All right, well, let's get started here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the quote-unquote kickoff and keynote for the Conservation Finance Roundtable. Obviously, we're not exactly at the Des Moines Botanical Gardens as planned, but we're excited nonetheless to connect with you all today. Maybe we'll just have to escape cabin fever and imagine ourselves in the Tropical Geodome Conservancy at the Des Moines Botanical Gardens. Wait to experience the real thing next spring, fingers crossed. I'm Lee Welpton, Director of the Conservation Finance Network. I'll be co-facilitating today along with my colleague, Allegra Rockledge, who is incorrectly identified as Michelle Haynes, our colleague who is unfortunately out sick today. Let's see, we will also be joined by Kari Cohen and Adam Chambers of the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, along with farmer Wayne Fredericks and Adam Kiel of the Iowa Soybean Association. So we'll get started and then pass things over accordingly. First and foremost, let us just start and take a moment to send our best wishes to your family, to your organizations, to your communities, as we're all doing our best to cope with the circumstances of the COVID pandemic. We know many of you have family and friends putting their health and wellness at risk so that the rest of us can stay in. Just to share our gratitude for helping to keep all those critical services and functions open and in motion. And also we have a few folks who are probably joining us for the first time. We did share the webinar with some folks who haven't been to a roundtable in the past. Welcome, glad to have you with us. So just for context, I'll share that this roundtable initiative is really the result of a 2015 Conservation Innovation Grant from NRCS to the Conservation Finance Network, meant to provide a dynamic forum for learning, interaction, and continued engagement through the delivery of these roundtable meetings. We've been delivering these since 2016, together with NRCS and a range of experts and partners. And our SIG is coming to its end here. But we have every intention of continuing the roundtable series, and I've got an update on that front that I'll share in just a bit. All right, so Kari, Adam, Allegra, and I are going to start by kicking things off, as we often do for the roundtable sessions, with a brief update on what's happened since we were last together at the hatchery in Chicago this past October. We're then going to hand things over to Adam and Wayne to discuss Wayne's journey to becoming a self-proclaimed accidental conservationist, an early adopter of no-till soybean production practices. Pretty excited. Wayne's going to walk us through the productive, profitable, and sustainable crop practices he employs with attention to soil, water, and air quality. And if we do it right, we should have about 10 minutes left at the end for questions. This webinar is going to be the first of 3 sessions as we convert select content from the roundtable agenda to webinar. We want to save some good stuff for the eventual Des Moines roundtable next spring, but a few of the sessions we're going to bring to you live remotely. We'll host the second session, New Funds, Products, and Initiatives, on April 7th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to be joined by Maggie Monast from the Environmental Defense Fund as moderator. Let's see, I've got the lineup. If I can figure out how to toggle the presentation. There we go. So here's today's speaker lineup. And then the next session, we'll be joined with Aaron Heidkamp of Pipeline Foods, Mark Lambert of Quantified Ventures, and Aaron Leonard of Mercaris. So stay tuned. We sent out a link for registering for that yesterday, and a reminder will go out in the not too distant future. Let's see. Please stay tuned. So we've got a yet to be scheduled 3rd webinar of our 3-part roundtable series here, where we'd like to introduce folks to the new 2019 Conservation Innovation Grant cohort of awardees. So yet to be scheduled, stay tuned, but likely sometime in late April. Couple quick housekeeping items related to the Zoom platform. So we've muted your lines, we've turned off your video. We are going to use the chat function to help make this interactive with Q&A. So please use that chat, submit your questions. As we're going here, Allegra will interject with any questions she sees come through during the kickoff, quote unquote. And then any questions that come through while Wayne is delivering his keynote, we'll just hold to the end. Also, all these presentations will be recorded and uploaded to the Conservation Finance Network website. So if you have colleagues or other folks who aren't able to attend live, we'll definitely accommodate them with the recording. So quick roundup from the field. Folks have been exceedingly busy, and it has been exciting to see some of the headlines come through. Just since we last met, Quantified Ventures has worked with the City of Buffalo and launched a $30 million environmental impact bond with Quantified Ventures. And then together with the Iowa Soybean Association, Quantified Ventures also launched a Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. It's providing financial incentives to farmers and landowners to implement ag best management practices and monetizes the resulting environmental benefits by selling verified outcomes to the beneficiaries. So Mark Lambert's going to join us on that April 7th session to talk more about the new fund, and we're very much excited to get into the details there. Also, Delta Institute has shared a $1 billion, oh, sorry, not Delta Institute, Delta Airlines has shared a $1 billion pledge to become carbon neutral. TBD on what happens in light of all that's transpiring now, but a pretty exciting announcement nonetheless. Pivoting over to the Climate Action Reserve, they've accepted the first grasslands carbon offset protocol.
For a conference call, but
can you mute all lines, Allegra?
I did chat with Mark Kaiser briefly. And
Allegra, can you mute everyone?
He's been involved since day one. And
I'll get it in a second.
Thanks.
Got it.
Thanks. All right. As we all figure out how to do Zoom, especially for big meetings, please, bear with us. We're figuring out the technology as much as I'm sure you all are as well. All right, so Climate Action Reserve, interesting news from Canada. They've accepted the first grassland carbon offset protocol for Canadian agricultural producers developed by the Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association. So exciting to see that work spiral forward. See some new trading volume there. Climate Action Reserve is also developing a soil enrichment project protocol to provide guidance on how to quantify, monitor, report, and verify ag practices that enhance carbon storage in soils. More to come on that. Ecosystem Investment Partners just closed their fourth conservation fund, coming in at a whopping $455 million, pretty exciting. Iroquois Valley Farmland REIT, related to their 2016 Conservation Innovation Grant, raised $6 million for soil restoration funding. They also were awarded a 2019 Conservation Innovation Grant, which we look forward to sharing more about on that third planned webinar. BP has invested with Finite Resources, the parent company of Finite Carbon, for farmers to expand, I'm reading off my phone, so bear with me. We couldn't figure out how to have my notes available while also sharing my screen. BP's invested with Finite Resources, allowing them to launch a voluntary offset program. Mad Agriculture launched their perennial fund, which is providing flexible capital for farmers to expand their organic acreage. Nori has completed their pre-seed round with 1.3 million and has launched their carbon marketplace. And Indigo has closed their 200 million in financing to build out the Indigo grain marketplace and Indigo carbon. So not comprehensive to say the least, but just our quick aggregation of some exciting news coming out of various partners, roundtable stakeholders, and others as we pay attention to the growth of the marketplace and the growth of the field. And then by way of an update from the Conservation Finance Network, we are launching a new initiative that stems from the Chicago Roundtable. So if you recall, for folks that were there, that during the Conservation Innovation Grant Lessons Learned session with Chief Weller, Adam Chambers, and Kari, the idea came about to do an assessment report really highlighting the SIGs, seeing what could be learned from the data and following the paths of the cohort of projects in aggregate. So we are very pleased to share that with generous support from the Walton Family Foundation, CFN is proceeding with that effort and plan to release a report at the next roundtable meeting. Our goal is to capture and distill insight from across the grant cohort, all for the purpose of increasing practitioner insight of what it takes to implement projects, scale market activity, and achieve on-the-ground conservation outcomes. Part of this involves the engagement of a TUC first-year project team. So just to give folks a heads up, we're very excited to have a team of MBA students working with us, assisting with the in-depth case research and analysis on select CIG projects, which should hold some instructive insight on market development as well. And so if you are a SIG recipient, particularly of the 2015, 16, or 17 cohorts, we haven't reached out to you yet, but don't be surprised when we do so in the not too distant future. And any help you can give us or assistance with data collection and sharing your experiences would just be most appreciated as we proceed with this effort. And lastly, as we obviously had to postpone today's roundtable, we plan for our next in-person event to be held in Denver this fall, likely in late October or early November. We'll send a save the date as soon as we're able, still working on a venue and reaching out to some folks in the Denver area to help us as a quote unquote host committee. So stay tuned for more, and you'll certainly be the first to know. All right, I'm gonna hit the pause button on myself and pass it over to Kari Cohen and Adam Chambers from an update from NRCS. Kari? Allegra, can you unmute Kari?
Yeah, I will find Kari's number quickly. Sorry about that. Sorry, folks. You think that
I think I've got you, Kari.
Okay.
All
yeah,
right.
there we go.
Back. All right. Hopefully you were enjoying my lovely fish tank behind me. Well, thanks, Lee and Allegra, for pulling this together. It's really great, even though we obviously can't be together in Des Moines. I'm coming at you live from my basement. Excited to be here. Hope everyone's doing well out there across the nation. So Lee just mentioned this effort to compile some lessons learned and some successes and potentially some failures from the big cohort of conservation finance projects that we started funding in 2015. Really excited that in the brief period of time following the Chicago roundtable that Walton Family Foundation was able to provide some resources, and really excited to get that off the ground and to be able to do something with the community that we just do not have bandwidth to do ourselves. So really appreciate that. The next thing I'll talk about is our Regional Conservation Partnership Program. You may remember that I was on my knees pleading with you all at the last roundtable to think about potential proposals for this new innovative provision in the RCPP statute that we call the Alternative Funding Arrangements. It took a little bit longer than we had anticipated to get that out the door, but we did release that. Ooh, the weeks are flying by, but it might have been last week. And it's open for 60 days. And again, if you'll remember, this is the more grant-like provision of RCPP, where we are strictly going to work with a lead partner, that lead partner in turn will go and take our funding, work with landowners, work with ag producers, work with private forest landowners to do good conservation in a more grant-like fashion. If you remember, the RCPP statute actually mentions leveraging our federal funding with private financial mechanisms. It talks about pay for performance and pay for success mechanisms. So again, we're really looking forward to some proposals coming in from this community. I know I've spoken with several of you already. We can fund up to 15, that's 15, proposals each year. That's by statute. And this go around, our leadership decided that we're going to offer up to 50, that's $50 million through this funding announcement. It is open until May 18th, and we are having a webinar next Thursday, a week from today, April 2nd. Information on how to tune in is on the RCPP website, and that's for potential applicants. We're going to walk through the funding announcement in some detail and try to answer any questions that you all may have. The other thing, if folks are interested in applying, it's really important that you contact and start a line of communication with your state RCPP coordinator. These are folks in our NRCS state offices that are trained in this program and understand RCPP and how to get things done at the state level, because it is our states that actually manage all of these projects. So I'll just make that note. If you are interested in applying, reach out early and often to your state coordinator. A list of them is housed there on our national RCPP website. I'll move quickly on to conservation innovation grants. Lee mentioned that we are planning to have a third webinar here that would go into some detail on our new cohort of projects that we announced last December. That includes Mad Agriculture, Greenprint Partners, Croton Institute, and others. Really excited to get started with those folks. We're actually hosting remotely now orientation for all of our new CIG awardees next week. So look forward to speaking with those folks next week, and then doing a deeper dive with everyone here on the third webinar. And lastly, Lee had asked me to just talk a little bit about the COVID virus and its impact really on our producers and USDA operations. I won't spend much time, but I will say that our producers out there, our farmers, our ranchers, our forest landowners, they've been struggling for some time under all sorts of stresses, whether it's trade issues, weather. It looks like we're going to have another wet spring, and of course, things like this that could impact their ability to get timely assistance from USDA, that could impact their ability to get their crops into the ground or get services from their feed suppliers, and you name it. Obviously, with physical distancing and social distancing, all of this stuff can be challenging. At NRCS, at least, we've got lots of folks, my colleagues, working on contingency plans because we've had to close offices and try to figure out ways to continue to service producers in this very challenging environment. My programs, my branch, we're mostly okay. We're all teleworking. So CIG, RCPP, we run these programs through our partners, and we understand that our partners are struggling too and face lots of challenges. But we're certainly not working at the field level directly like many of my colleagues are. So our programs are continuing on. That's why you continue to see our funding announcements come out. You continue to see us producing documents and webinars and things because we're able to continue working here remotely. So obviously lots of upheaval in all sectors around the country, and agriculture is no different, but we'll obviously make the best of it, and wish everyone continued good luck in dealing with your challenges. And with that, Lee, I'll just turn it back over to you.
All right, and I'm just going to do a relay over to Adam Kiel, who's going to provide an introduction of Wayne and get things rolling for us. Wayne, I'm also going to stop my screen share, so if you want to go ahead and start yours, we should be good to go.
All right, thanks, Lee. I think I'm off mute, but if not, let me know. Welcome virtually to Des Moines, Iowa, or at least that's where I'm at currently. Wayne's queuing up his presentation as we speak, so I'm not going to take too much time here, but I just want to let you know that Wayne has been an inspiration to me as I've continued my journey on identifying ways to bring conservation to more farmers in Iowa, and I hope you all enjoy his message. I'll just say that the way us as conservation finance professionals talk about ag and conservation practices is probably different than how Wayne's going to talk about conservation and the things that he's doing on his farm. So hopefully this is a way for us to learn more about how farmers view conservation. And I think in Wayne's message and towards the end of his presentation where he talks about cost savings and finance ideas, that we can find a Venn between how farmers view conservation and how we as practitioners are trying to identify solutions. So with that, I'll pass it over to Wayne. Welcome, Wayne.
Okay, have you opened my mic?
Yep, you're good.
Yes, we can all hear you, Wayne.
Good enough. Well, thanks, Adam, for the introduction. And also, I want to thank the Conservation Finance Network for giving me the opportunity to share a little of my story with you today. And I think we all enjoy a good story. And I'm going to share with you my soil health story. My wife and I started farming in the early 70s in the upper part of Iowa where the star is. And as some people in the conservation arena might allude to, we're just south of the North Pole. We're up there far where cover crops and no-till usually aren't considered as successful practices, but we're going to show how we've made that work in our farming operation and made that transition. I do want to remind all of my listeners that for my first 19 years of farming, that we were fully a conventional farm operation. We plowed all of our corn stalks ahead of corn or soybeans, and we tilled all of our soybean stubble ahead of corn. So the first chapter in the story of my transition to soil health came along with no-till soybeans, and that came in the fall winter of 91, 92, and we actually froze up. We froze up early, and we didn't get any of our fall plowing done, and that was not unusual compared to a lot of my neighbors again this year. But I sat in my office in December that year wondering what the heck I was going to do, and I happened to run across an article about a fellow in Minnesota that was no-tilling soybeans. And in January, when I was visiting with my John Deere dealer, he says, "Well, by the way, we're getting one of those no-till drills in and to try on our operation, and if you want to try it, we'll sure lend it to you." And we did. We borrowed it. We ended up planting all of our soybeans. Boy, they grew well that summer. The weed control was good. They harvested well that fall. They yielded outstanding. Folks, I was hooked. I went fully from plowing to no-till soybeans in one fell swoop, and that's like I always comment that I was kind of an accidental conservationist just simply by the change of weather. And I hope we get a few more of those in seasons like this. Today we use a planter. We find it to be a little more efficient than a drill, and our goal is to get a beautiful stand of soybeans amongst the residue. But we've moved into cover crops, and now our goal is to be able to plant into standing cereal rice such as this, and this is the same field 35 days later. That's our goal, is to have a good healthy bean crop and work with a cover crop and utilize the advantages that can bring. Our story to strip till took a little longer, about a decade later, but when we started no-till soybeans, you start to go to no-till meetings, and the conversation always comes around, well, you're no-tilling beans, what are you doing for corn? Well, at that time, we were still continuing to work our ground ahead of corn, and as I looked at the yield trials from Iowa State University at both the Nashua farm and the Kanawha farm, which are the ones closest to me, typically no-till corn would fall behind by 10 or 15 bushels an acre. It really wasn't something that economically looked like something I wanted to do. But about that same time, strip till came on the horizon, and that started to look very promising. And my fertilizer dealer and I went and visited with a farmer in Minnesota making it work. And after that conversation, my dealer bought his first strip till rig. He continues to do my strip till for me to this very day. We put our P&K on in the fall in those strips. That's our goal, is to get still good residue cover out there. And come spring, we no-till right into those fall-built strips. And we'll find those strips to be 7 to 10 degrees warmer than the middles. They're going to be drier. They're going to be every bit as ready to plant as any of the conventional soils in the area. So timing-wise, it works out real well for me, especially when I'm operating on my own without hired labor. But our goal is to, again, get uniform stand of corn and amongst that beautiful residue. and try to save our soil. Again, we're moving into cover crops ahead of corn, and this is our goal is to get a good standard eye even in our strip till situation, and ultimately 30 days later you got beautiful corn amongst that residue. Other farm practices, not to show that we're just strictly talking about tillage. Our first cooperative at work with NRCS was in 1984 when we planned and designed this windbreak. Every tree you see in this picture I planted on this farm except for the maple that's in the upper right. We work with NRCS on waterways. Look how flat this horizon is, but yet we still need some large waterways sometimes to handle the rain. And with the ever-increasing rainfalls that we get, we continue to need more of them. We've got a bioreactor, first bioreactor in Rock Creek watershed in Mitchell County. It happens to be luckily strategically located by a road where we've been able to showcase this to our elected representatives, such as my senator and representative. I sit on the Monarch Collaborative on behalf of the American Soybean Association, and we're a very strong promoter of habitat, and we have 7 strategically placed pollinator habitats on our farm as well. Well, let's get into the economics. That's what drives a lot of the questions many times, and I want to say these are my farm and my figures. This is a chart that I've shown often for many years, but back in 2006 to 13, I had the opportunity through our accounting system, which is Agri-Solutions out of Brighton, Illinois, and through their farm software called Ag Manager, to become part of a benchmarking database group. There was 86 farmers that was part of this group. We were Midwestern corn and soybean farmers, and we would share our records with the business system in Brighton, Illinois, periodically, every 6 months at least, to make sure that we are all making the entries in the same format. In other words, we would enter depreciation the same way, we'd enter our family living costs the same, equipment costs, seed costs, and so forth. So when we got together to benchmark well, once a year for sure we benchmarked, we were comparing apples to apples instead of apples and oranges. And in that study, one of the things that showed the glaring, most dramatic differences in cost was equipment cost per acre. And us being a no-tiller or strip tiller versus the majority of that group being all conventional, it kind of became obvious that our practices cost less when it comes to equipment cost. I looked into Iowa State's figures for last year, and they had $59 for low till and $74 for conventional. And that was only a $15 difference. And visiting with a neighbor of mine who adopted full strip till in their operation a couple years ago, they calculated a $29 difference. What I'm saying, we're all going to have different figures, but there is a savings when you move to less tillage on the land. I also want to make aware that we have also allocated all of these peripheral costs that all of us on a farm have into those equipment costs per acre for us. So we might look a little higher than some, but we have costs like this included, whereas most of them are strictly looking at a custom rate-based cost or something of that sort. Over the same 8-year period of time, we also showed a $27 per acre advantage for labor. We're just not out there as often. It doesn't take as much labor in a low-till system. One of the things I think was most dramatic, and we started farming, I said, in the early 70s. These are 3 farms. They're color-coded. One of them, we rented them 75, 76, and 77. That was the transition of acquiring these 3 rented pieces of ground. But in 1984, and I was working with a crop consultant at that time, suggested when he was pulling soil samples that we also pull organic matter samples because we needed to know what the herbicide rates needed to be. And at that time, that was something relative to many of the herbicides we used. And so we did. And then we adopted no-till and strip-till in this decade. And the next time we happened to pull an organic matter sample was 2007. Now we sample the soil every year that is in soybeans. And so in our rotation, corn bean rotation, it's sampled every 2 years. But usually we're just, sampling for the macronutrients, the NPK, sulfur, and pH. We don't pay for the extra charge that they get for organic matter samples. In 2012, the next time organic matter was pulled for, we again saw some increase, and finally in 15, we're still seeing some increase, although we're sampling it every year now, so the rate of increase is much less. But when we sat down and did a long-term analysis, we basically saw that we increased our organic matter 2.5% over approximately 25 years, or roughly 1/10 of 1% per year. And if I reached out to Iowa State or University of Illinois or University of Minnesota and talked to their soils people, most of them would say that that would be an acceptable increase in organic matter in a corn soybean rotation from discontinuing your full width tillage, and what we did. And what we're looking at here is primarily a tillage change, because our cover crops really didn't enter the picture until we got out about 2016. And so I was kind of looking at this with interest and wondering, you know, what's my potential for number one, and number two, well, maybe where did we come from? And so last time we pulled organic matter samples, we went and pulled fence row samples from these farms, and we found a range from 6 to 9%. And basically the 6% related to the light green one, which is more of a timber-based soil, and the 9% are related to the other two farms, which are definitely prairie-based systems. And, you know, it's quite interesting. And the sad part of the whole message there was that we destroyed 2/3 of the organic matter from whence we began our intensive tillage in these systems. You know, we went from 9 down to 3, you know, or 6 down to 2. And it's taken me 25 years to get half of that back, you know, simply from a tillage change. And so I want to bring this point up because I think it's a real key to a lot of our systems as we move forward, but it's only a key if there's value to it. And so I scoured my information sources trying to find out if somebody had sat down and put value to organic matter. And I found this brochure put out by the Iowa division of NRCS that does give an incremental value of 1%, or in other words, 10 tons in a 6-inch core of soil organic matter. And the first thing they give is an enhanced water availability value of $18 an acre. And if you notice in parentheses, I have the 20/80 rule. I attribute that to Dr. Jerry Hatfield and his team at USDA Agricultural Research Service in Ames, Iowa, formerly for many of us, the TILF Lab. And I've heard Jerry give his presentation many times, and in that he says that we lose 20% of our potential yield 80% of the time because of the lack of plant available moisture. I'll repeat that. We lose 20% of our yield 80% of the time because of plant available moisture. You know, for here in our part of the world, that's 240 bushel corn versus 210, or 60 bushel beans versus 50. That's because when we get to July, August, early September, when a lot of times it turns dry, that's when this really sets in and has value. So if you have good organic matter in your soil, and your soils has the ability to absorb rainfall rather than shedding it because of poor soil structure, you can get this extra moisture in there, and it is plant available. And this is where they improve, you know, that plant availability and give that value. It also has a mineralizable value of N and P of $11 an acre. And I just read a recent research report from Ohio State and Kansas State that give it an additional $1 because of the sulfur value. So, you know, you can 11 versus 12, but if you add the two together, 1% organic matter typically should have about a $29 value on an annual basis. And so I just took the simple math. I said, let's just look at the organic matter that we recovered in 25 years, multiplied by that, and we come up with roughly $72 an acre on an annual basis that improved organic matter ought to help the productivity of our farm operation. And then I sat back and I said, you know, if you capitalize that at 5%, that means my farm ought to be worth roughly $1,400 an acre more than my neighbor right across the fence with the same soil who has continued to do full width tillage. We don't value farms that way yet. I think we should. I think that's the future. If we're going to rebuild or rejuvenate these soils, there's got to be some value hung on to that. And so I think that is, as far as moving ahead, you know, looking from conservation finance, we really need to engage that conversation in a lot more depth. So if I take my system economics with all this in consideration, we got equipment cost advantage of 44 and labor of 27, increased organic matter 72. I'm going to put cover crop cost in here. This was my cost for the current cover crop that's out there, minus 27, because this is the way a banker is going to look at it on his sheet. It still leaves me a net value of 116 bucks. You know, even if you want to shave my advantages by half, we still got some serious dollars out there that we can recognize that have value to the system. So is really there at minus 27 to cover crop cost? First of all, I think we got to, answer the question, why cover crops to start with? If we've got a positive system with a tillage change, why look at a system that might have some negative cost? Well, go back to 2008, and this is a picture of my home, and this is after 6-inch rainfall as we're sitting out here looking at a small waterway. You might say you got lakeshore property, but not really. We had water over the driveway as well. This is a day later in Charles City up on the Upper Cedar River. And 5 days later, we're looking at Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This is the watershed that I farm in. I think many of us can remember the serious flooding that city undergone at that time. It was disastrous, cost millions and millions of dollars. But it started to become aware in my mind at that time, the practices that we as farmers engage upon the land can have a significant difference to these communities downstream, not only in the quality of the water, but the quantity. This is huge to them if we can make our landscape more like a sponge and we can soak up more of this water and help prevent some of this flooding. A year later, I got elected on the Iowa Soybean Board and got heavily involved in the on-farm network, and we began using cover crop trials in 2012, simply because this was kind of one of the latest things that was coming on the scene. We were trying to see what species worked well, what kind of crop interaction we had, how to terminate them, and so forth. And so that engagement, started to heighten my awareness of cover crops. And then in 2013, I adopted the nutrient reduction strategy. Most of us are aware of those strategies. They're happening nationwide, but, environmentalists sued the EPA because they weren't, enforcing, water quality in the Gulf of Mexico and the hypoxia zone. And EPA turned right around and reached out to the states and asked the states to develop strategies because they felt, strategies on a statewide basis made more sense. At the same time that Iowa released their strategy, the Rock Creek Watershed Plan went into effect. And I was one of the farmer advisors on that watershed planning effort. And Adam Kiel, also worked on that with us in Mitchell County. But we were the first watershed to adopt a watershed plan following the adoption of the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. So we could write our plan that fell right in lieu or right in step with the Iowa plan. But if you look at that plan and you sit here and look what cover crops can do, a dramatic reduction in nitrate, 30%. We look at what it does to phosphorus. Again, you got a 30% reduction there. And I was already no-tilling, so I was getting a 90% reduction in the phosphorus load from that practice. So these things just start to build up, and you get more and more excited about the potential. And then we start moving and talking about soil health, and you don't pick up a farm periodical anywhere anymore that doesn't cover some way, shape, or form of soil health. And so cover crops are a huge part in engaging in that conversation. But I think what drove it most of all for me was I was president of Iowa Soybean in 2016, and that was the second year of this lawsuit that we had between the Des Moines Waterworks and the farms in Northwest Iowa. And it was a tough time. It was a time where we really had division in Iowa between the urban and the farmers. And this is something, folks, that I don't want to have to live through again, because it was really seriously ugly time on the landscape in Iowa. And so we got into cover crops heavily, from that point forward. So cover crops in our system. 2016, we got bold. This is where I was planting soybeans. You can see here that we're going to go out here and do this in style. We were planting in 30-inch plus tall, residue. One of the interesting parts of this field for me was we had been sampling tile outlets on this farm for a period of time. 2014, we pulled a couple samples. We're at 13.23 milligrams per liter. For those of you unfamiliar, 10.0 is the drinking water standard. So we was over the standard by over 3 milligrams per liter. In 2015, when this field was in corn, it was at 13.98. Still not unusual for our watershed. This is pretty, common of the watersheds in our area. 2016, the year I planted green into that tall cereal rye, our tiles was testing 4.1 milligrams per liter nitrate. Folks, that's pretty near 70% reduction. That's even far more than expected in the nutrient reduction strategy. And boy, I'm starting to get excited when I see results like that. We moved next year, 2017. This is one of those farms in the organic matter study that's about 6.5% organic matter now. Now it was pattern tiled in 2005 on 70-foot centers. We have 2 outlets. They're in the grass area on the end of that field. There's a road there, and on the other side in that timber is Rock Creek. And they pulled, about the time this picture was taken, Iowa Soybean was sampling tile, and they pulled the tile samples for this field, 3.22 milligrams per liter nitrate and 3.46 milligrams per liter nitrate. That's a tremendous reduction. And I asked the gentleman that was doing the sampling, I said, do you happen to know what Rock Creek is testing? And he said, yes, it's running right around 10 milligrams per liter at this time. And bingo, a light went off in my head. We had this kind of reduction happening all across Iowa. We would not have had the lawsuit in Des Moines the previous 2 years. I was actually taking tile water and putting it into Rock Creek and making the creek cleaner, not dirtier. This is what gets me excited about the potential for cover crops in the system. Here's just, research that Iowa Soybean has done of all the systems that they were sampling, showing at 4.2 milligrams per liter reduction in areas that got cover crops versus none. So as I sit here and I look at our system, and cover crops is part of it, we also see other advantages. We reduce phosphate losses. We don't talk about that so much in Iowa, but boy, if you talk to farmers in the Ohio River Basin and Lake Erie, that's their main concern is phosphorus losses. We save on fertilizer cost. And SARE, if you're not familiar, is a Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Foundation. That's a group that comes under USDA, but they study a lot of these type systems. And they say that on average, you should be able to save $21 in fertility cost. $19 is our actual, what we're saving on our farm. Better weed control, especially with resistant weeds. Sarah suggests there should be a $10 savings there. We're seeing 11. Reduce soil loss. Sarah again, 2. And we're going to take the 2. I'm not going to doubt him on that one. Help build soil structure. You go back to a couple falls ago when it was so darn wet. Those of us that have been in a system of mine was able to harvest, unimpeded. But most farmers that were in deep or intensive tillage were having trouble getting stock, and combines were cutting ruts. Just imagine the fuel costs for those systems. Help manage soil moisture. You turn right around in the spring, we had wet springs, and just having that cover crop growing there give me another tool to help dry that soil so that it was more fit to plant in a timely fashion. Increased air exchanges in the soil. So many people saw the yellow corn and say, well, we've got a lack of nitrogen. Folks, it was a lack of air. In our system, we saw, green corn. We never had any yellow in our system last year. Rapidly add to the soil biology. Folks, when I was back in college in the early 70s and studying agronomy, our agronomy study was sand, silt, clay, NP and K and pH, and there wasn't a single word mentioned about bugs or biology of the soil. But today, soil biology is probably one of the most rapidly growing fields in agronomy at our universities. There's so much there to learn and so much we're going to get from it in the future. Anchor residue in place. Folks, you get a 5 and 6 inch rainfall and downpour, residue is going to float. And those of us that have got a good cover crop system out there have been able to hold a lot of that on the field and keep it from washing into our road ditches and plugging up culverts and costing our county road crews a whole lot of extra additional expense. It provides a physical barrier between the tires and the soil. We're planting green. we need to terminate and get a herbicide on before that crop comes up. Last year, when it's continually raining all the time, it was just because I had cover crops out there that I could get out there with a tractor and sprayer and not cause any damage. Harvest carbon for an additional 4 months of the year. You know, this is something that's going to be more and more important all the time for agriculture. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities in that system if we're doing, you know, getting into the carbon market. Provide ecosystem services. You know, I get the $5 an acre that the Iowa IDOLS is giving for those of us that don't have, you know, our cover crop that doesn't have cost share. And, you know, I don't get cost share anymore because I've been in it so long. So that's my only cost share for cover crops is that $5. And this is one that I run into just this last spring. You know, this was the year we could change our crop insurance systems, you know, and I chose to take PLC on corn, and I know this can get in detail. And with PLC, you have the opportunity to take SCO, which is a supplemental coverage option. Long story short, I start to compare my yields with county, and if I'm favorable, this is a better system for me to look at. But in short, it saved me $6.75 an acre on my crop insurance premium, just because we've developed a more resilient, better system. So overall, I could find in this picture, you know, roughly $40 that we can attribute to cover crop. But, you know, if I take this to a banker, it's real hard sometimes to just be able to pull that out of the sky. You got to really sit there and do an analysis of that. So let's look at the production benefits to our farm and a little bit of history here. I was asked, you know, last spring to give a presentation or a webinar to NRCS, and I was reaching out to Dr. Jerry Hatfield, who I mentioned earlier, you know, about, you know, what's some of the things we'd like to discuss. And in that conversation, Jerry actually turned around and asked me if I'd be willing to share any of my digital yield data if I had any, and so they could take a look at it. Well, how many farmers would jump up and down to send all their yield data to USDA? Not many, I'm sure, but I looked at it as a tremendous opportunity to have another set of eyes look at my data and see if they could find something that maybe I wasn't looking at and seeing. And so I would gladly share my data. So I loaded up 16 years worth of yield data and sent it to Dr. Jerry Hatfield at Ames and his team, and also the climatic data to go with it. And so this is some of the things we've seen. And Jerry and I also do a presentation, you know, about an hour long that discusses this. This is the first thing that we noticed, you know, and this is my rainfall data for that time period. And we're seeing about 7 inches more rainfall in that April, September time period when we got to be out there working in our fields. And I'll tell you, it's we can't farm the same way that we used to. We've got this much more water to deal with. We got to find systems that are much more resilient and able to withstand that kind of moisture penetration and rainfall. This is a geostatistical analysis that they've done with our yield data. Now, don't try to get buried in this slide because they're going to move the next one, you know, in real short order here, but just kind of gives you an example. They're comparing 2004 corn yields to 2018 corn yields on the same field and same place. But this chart, I think, gives you a better idea of what we're looking at. We're measuring here the frequency percent of where yields fall in the field. You put a bell curve over the top of these. Now, the dark yields are 2004 and the gray yields are 2018. But as we look at this field, it's a corn field. It's got some tile on one end. It's got some lime rock croppings on the other. So there's distinctively some variation in this field for sure. And we had approximately a 250 bushel variation in yields across that field, 2004. We look at the same field in 2018, and granted, we got a higher yield level because genetics and other things, but look how much narrower that bell curve is. We have narrowed up the yield spread or the variability in the field, and typically the hypothesis is that when you take on, soil building practices, you especially improve the poorer parts of that farm, much more rapidly maybe than the better parts. We'll look at a soybean field on the other side of the farm. This one is, again, they've done that geostatistical analysis. Again, we're looking at 2004 yields, and we see about a perfect bell curve there, about a 60 bushel spread in yields. Look what happened in 2018. Again, we're seeing higher yields, but look how much narrower that bell curve. You know, it's this area down in here that the crop insurance industry is looking at. If we can narrow the bell curve on these rejuvenated farms, their risk is always down here. And so that's where that conversation comes out, especially when I sit on a national basis and working on policy and so forth. There are some reasons to give farmers who adopt these practices some benefit when it comes to the crop insurance premiums. We look at whole farm corn yields. You know, this is 2001 when we adopted strip till until 19. This has included this last year. And we find in there, boy, there's a blurb. We got 2 years went real good, and what the hell happened for 3 years? Well, we came out of a weed and feed system, and in that system, we was putting our liquid nitrogen and herbicide on the soil surface, working it in with a field cultivator, and that worked great. That was the accepted system in the 80s and 90s. When we went to strip till, we couldn't work it in, so we was going to rely on rainfall. And that worked real great the first 2 years. The next 3 years, our rainfall became less dependable at the proper timing, and we lost through volatilization too much of our nitrogen. And so as it was after going through that excruciating pain that we finally purchased our own side dress applicator in 2007. We hired it done in 6, but we found out through better nitrogen management that we could escape those issues. And from that point forward, our yields, you know, leveled right out and with the county averages. I'd also like to know during the same time period, I'd like you to know, that we went back and compared our P&K expenses with ISU crop budgets for that time frame, and noticed that we expended about $8.78 an acre less in P&K. Our nitrogen expenses would be about the same because we've always stayed at MRTN or that area. If we look at soybean yields, this is since we adopted no-till way back in '92. Again, our yields are in orange. We never saw a blip. You know, soybeans production is always, work real well for us. Here in 2016, if you remember the picture, we were planting green. That was the first year we planted all of our soybeans into that real tall 30-inch rye. And it was also the highest soybean yields I ever raised. So, you know, it just kind of lends credence to the system. You can make it work. Again, I want to emphasize, we're doing this also under, you know, less fertilizer expense. So in short, as we look at the system, you know, we lowered our cost of production. We've lowered our N and P loss, and there's a public benefit to that. We put that in asterisk. We've lowered water runoff. We've lowered soil loss. We've reduced our yield variability. We've improved our soil structure. We've raised our soil carbon levels, and we still maintain yields. All of them have a public benefit, and it's something we've been able to do in the adoption of all that conservation. So final thoughts, you know, as you work to improve water quality and soil health, we know that eliminating full tillage will build soil health. Cover crops will build soil health. You put the two together at the same time, and we can speed that process up much faster than the 25 years that it took for me to build that soil health. We know that these can be adopted profitably, especially when you put the two together. Today's knowledge base can dramatically lower the risk of adopting these challenges or changes to the operation. This is the biggest thing, and I do a lot of speaking, is we want farmers to adopt, but we want them to adopt with confidence that they can do it correctly. And so we're willing to be mentors and answer a lot of questions and help farmers work their way through this. I think that's crucial to success. There are a lot of dollars today that are available, you know, through USDA, state funds, NGOs, and other groups are putting forth money into this arena. And it makes a good time now, I think, to consider change. You know, final points, you know, that I put in here for especially this group, financing points to ponder. I was part of a white paper that Iowa Soybean done in conjunction with EDF and the Walton Foundation last summer, but you know, this is a quote strictly from that paper, and it's true in our farm. Savings from a practice that primarily controls erosion, which would be a tillage change, and phosphorus loss, are being utilized to fund a practice that further reduces erosion and sequesters nitrogen, which is the cover crops. We're seeing that, and Do we put that, I say you adopt the two together, you can still do it profitably, but we got to, make it attractive to adopt that second part. We got to be reminded that the nutrient reduction strategy, when you look at cover crops, that's a $36 an acre annual cost. Somehow we got to approach that if we're going to be successful. The length of time it takes to build healthy soils that pay back, that's the question. If we're going to support these systems initially with cost sharing that, how long do we need to do that? I hear a lot of people in the knowledgeable, at level think, this is maybe 5 years or maybe somewhat less. Mitigate that learning curve, risk. I took a beating on nitrogen, loss there for a couple, 3 years. That's what we call learning curve. And there's, like I say, those of us that are actively engaged in this field are actively presenting and being part of conferences and so forth. And I think that's critical, passing the knowledge on. Should those who share the benefits share the cost? There's a lot of public benefit out here. There's a lot of landowner benefit, as well as some benefits to go to the tenant. And I think we got to raise the discussion on the value of carbon to land, because that can go a whole new direction if you really start talking with landowners about what's the value of their farm doing relative to carbon. Is it going up or down? But I think most of all, as conservation finance is a lending community, you got to be supportive. It's the right thing to do. And I say, remember the plow, because I grew up through that transition. The 70s and early 80s, it was a plow culture. And then all of a sudden we started moving into chisel plows and more of a residue-based system. And some of that was driven by the 1985 Farm Bill. But I'll tell you right up front that the moldboard plow still had the highest yielding crops out there versus a chisel plow. I struggled to make a chisel plow system work, but we knew it was the right thing to do. And agriculture moved forward in the direction of realizing that we needed more residue on the land, that we couldn't continue to plow. I think cover crops maybe fall into this same category. It's going to be hard right away in the beginning to point out the profitability, but it's the right thing to do. And I think in the long run will be the correct thing to do. Folks, this is what I want to avoid going through again, another water war, and I hope we can step up and avoid it. Folks, that's my story, and I'm open for questions.
Great, Wayne. This is Adam again. We're going to probably stay online for 15 minutes. If people want to stay online for questions, we've got a few queued up in the chat. I'll start going through those as best we can, knowing that we're not going to get through everything, but I'll talk about some of I'll ask Wayne some of the highlights. So, Wayne, thanks very much for the thoughtful presentation. Data is information, and I think seeing dollar figures by your work is really interesting, and thanks for making that information you're willing to share. So one of the questions that was posed in the chat room was, you mentioned Cedar Rapids and Charles City as downstream communities. The question was, has there been any efforts from Cedar Rapids and or other communities to work with farmers upstream, knowing that there is value for them? So maybe I'll let you tackle that first, and I can fill in if there's anything that you'd like me to talk about. Yeah,
there's a lot of activity going in this Cedar River watershed, and it's highly supported by Cedar Rapids. Charles City's engaged now, and we're seeing dollars, through RCPP programs that are filtering up here, and we're trying to build more of a sponge up here, and so there's a lot of good financial support that's worked our way. I haven't been able to tap in it because, unfortunately, if you're ahead of the curve, you usually don't qualify. They're always looking for new operations, which is fine. But I know some pretty nice payments that were available for adoption of, a combination of tillage change and cover crops. And I think that's really helpful in making farmers make that final decision to make that transition.
Yep, thanks, Wayne. The only thing I'd add to that is both Charles City and Cedar Rapids, both of the communities you mentioned, have active RCPP projects working with farmers upstream. So that's been a great effort by those two communities. Another question, you talked about the pollinator habitat that you have on your farm. Have you noticed any pest management benefits associated with the pollinator habitat or any of the other practices you're doing on your farm?
Good question. It's scattered in different places. It's more of an awareness thing for me, you know, because when we do, if and when we do need to treat, and if we need to use insecticide on our crop, you know, the awareness part is it's kind of like beehives. We got beehives close enough that we got to watch time of day and things like that. So it has changed the management, but it's well worth the effort for me. I always say when people come to visit anymore, we don't go out and look at crops, we go out and look at habitat, and because that's something it's really fun to show off.
Yep, sounds great. This is a question that I know you've put a lot of thought into, but you talked about the additional value that your conservation provides, and I think you mentioned $1,200 per acre additional value. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but how do you as a landowner and a farmer realize that additional value that you believe your soils have as a result of your practice? So what I'm asking is, you know, say you're going to sell the farm, how do we get to a point where your contributions to soil health are valued when that sale happens and you can fully realize that $1,200 per acre?
I think we need to, as a agricultural community, and that's, you know, those of us that own land or finance land or market land or buy land, need to raise that conversation, because it's truly, you know, as we look at the science, those farms are worth more. We're up here where we have quite a few that have been doing these practices, and the question has always come, you know, when you go to rent, if you're going to, you know, I'm getting up towards retirement age, I'm past retirement age, but when I do decide to rent ground out, you know, are you going to have trouble finding people willing to, you know, pay a decent rent and, you know, farm it as it's continue it as? And I think maybe quite the opposite. I think you could almost get premium rent, because those of us that have been doing this for a long time realize the time and effort it takes to build that health into a farm, and there's inherent values to that. But I always go back to the story when, you know, I went out South Dakota with my wife and some of her cousins for a family reunion, and one of her cousins and I spent a morning just kicking around implement dealerships to kill some time, and we kept seeing sale bills on the wall. And if you start looking down through the equipment for sale, you would see periodically the word shedded and shedded and shedded. And I asked the dealer, I says, what are you talking about here? What do they mean? He says, well, machine sheds are kind of a luxury item out here in the Dakotas. And he said, those farms that got them, or those pieces of equipment that get shedded, always bring a premium price at an auction. And so they advertise it. Well, we've got to find a way of being able to measure and denote land that has been improved. And eventually, I think we could capture market value for that. But right now, we don't have a system in place that can go in and measure these, you know, across the landscape, probably in a uniform way. I think as the carbon market grows and what these people are trying to do relative to creating a way of measuring carbon on the landscape, we might be able to tab in on some of that study and work being done. But I think there's opportunities ahead. It's just we need to start talking about it.
Sounds great. And speaking of opportunities, as we prepared for this, one of the things that you shared with me is that this year, I think, or maybe starting in previous years, you've reduced your crop insurance protection level, which is cheaper for you because you have less yield variability. You kind of hinted at that in the bell curves on those couple slides, looking at the 2004 comparison yields versus 2012 or whatever that second year was. That's a real cost savings for you. Am I right?
Exactly. It's, we just had proof through yield history that I perform as good or better than the county. And the option I took this year that saved me $6.75 an acre on the corn was that upper level was losses based on county loss, not my individual loss. So I'm out here, figuring that if the county is not doing very well, I'm going to get paid. And I may not have had a loss of my own. I'm competing against the county, not against myself. So it's a great option. And if you've got good soils and good production history and like we have, that's a great option to take and save you some money.
One question here, and we'll probably just wrap up unless people want to ask more. I think Adam Chambers just asked about precision ag, and are you figuring those costs into the cost that you shared on a few slides there, or how do you view the costs of precision equipment?
We've got, we're fully into the precision ag market. I had to shorten the presentation, but on average over that period of time, and since we've made an annual investment between $47,000 and $50,000 a year in machinery, equipment, technology, or so forth. So it's not like we're a standstill operation. And like I said, we've been yield mapping ever since 2003. We've got auto steer. We utilize that in our system, and we've got the automated swath controls and so forth. And it also makes doing yield trials and so forth a lot simpler when you're fully automated as we are. So yeah, we like to take the data and run it for all it's worth.
Okay, Wayne, that's great feedback, great presentation. Again, I'll thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. It's great information, and again, thanks for everything you do. I'm going to kick it back over to Lee for any final wrap-up remarks.
Wayne, thank you. Not the same as having you do the keynote in person, but I think a really great opportunity to connect and some incredible points of light and optimism for us here. So hopefully we can pull you into the Des Moines Roundtable to be rescheduled next spring. But just want to thank you from all of us for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
And folks, that'll do it for today. Thanks for helping us, quote unquote, kick off the roundtable, at least the 3-part webinar series that we're going to be holding in lieu of an in-person event. So next up, we'll reconvene 1 o'clock on April 7th to go through new funds, products, and initiatives. Thanks for sticking with us. All the best. Stay healthy, stay well, and we'll catch you soon. Thanks.